I never thought I would be the one telling this story, but here I am, forced to reveal the truth after years of being underestimated. For as long as I can remember, my family saw me as the one who would never amount to anything. While they paraded their accomplishments at every family gathering, I was the quiet one, always overlooked, always in the background. But tonight, at my cousin's engagement party, everything was about to change. I had been hiding a secret for years, a secret that would shatter their image of me once and for all. The irony? They never knew that I, Jordan, the failure in their eyes, was secretly the proud owner of a thriving restaurant, a success they couldn't have imagined. As I stood there, surrounded by family, I knew this was the moment I had to step forward and claim my truth. It was time to change the narrative, and I was ready. Growing up, my family was the kind of family that had their priorities set. My parents, always the center of attention, were consumed by the success of my older sister, Claire. She was the golden child, perfect grades, a prestigious career path, and a life that seemed to glitter with achievement. I, on the other hand, was just Jordan, the quiet, average son who never quite fit in their plans. My parents, though loving in their own way, were too wrapped up in Claire's success to notice mine. They always spoke of her future with pride, while my own accomplishments went unnoticed or brushed aside. I remember countless dinners where my attempts to share my ideas or passions were met with distant nods, as though I were speaking in another language. Their attention, always fleeting, never lingered long enough for me to feel seen. At home, we lived in a comfortable, suburban house. Everything was neat, tidy, and predictable, just like my family. And like the house, I often felt like I was a part of the scenery, blending into the background. I wanted more than anything to break free from this shadow, to make a name for myself. But no matter how hard I tried, my efforts seemed invisible to the people who mattered most. What they didn't know, though, was the secret I'd been hiding for years. While they dismissed my ambitions as unremarkable, I'd been quietly building something of my own, a successful restaurant that had started small but was now thriving. I kept it hidden, fearing their disappointment or, worse, their indifference. But tonight, that was about to change. The engagement party was in full swing when I arrived at the family friends' sprawling home, the laughter and chatter almost deafening. The place was packed with relatives I hadn't seen in ages, all gathered to celebrate Claire's engagement. As always, she was the center of attention. Everyone gathered around her, praising her accomplishments and eagerly talking about her upcoming wedding. In the corner of the room, I stood quietly, trying not to be noticed, feeling like the invisible one once again. My parents were deep in conversation with some of our relatives, and I overheard snippets of their gossip. "Oh, Jordan, he's still figuring things out, I suppose," my mother said, her voice almost dismissive. "He's always been a bit of a dreamer, hasn't he? Probably hasn't made much of himself yet." My father chuckled, a soft, almost affectionate laugh that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Well, Claire's on track to be a doctor, and look at Jordan. Who knows what he's doing?" The sting of their words hit harder than I cared to admit. It was a familiar tune, a constant reminder that I was the one who had never lived up to their expectations. They spoke about me as if I were a lost cause, a disappointment in the shadow of Claire's brilliance. They never bothered to understand what I had been working on, and the weight of their indifference was crushing. But what they didn't know was that the very restaurant they'd been raving about for months, the one they assumed was some local gem owned by someone else, was mine. The place everyone had been, praising for its food, its atmosphere, its success. That was my hard work, my late nights, my risk-taking. As I stood there, their laughter ringing in my ears, I felt the familiar frustration bubble up inside me. I had poured everything into this, and yet here I was, once again, the invisible son. No one knew the truth, not yet. For the past few years, while my family saw me as just the quiet guy with no clear direction, I had been quietly working to build something that no one expected. The Maple Bistro. Nestled in a cozy corner of town, it had quickly become one of the most talked-about spots for food lovers. It wasn't just a restaurant, it was a reflection of every ounce of energy I had poured into it. I sacrificed sleep, friendships, and every free moment to make sure it thrived. I had turned my dream into a reality, though not a single person in my family knew that I was behind it. While they gathered to celebrate Claire's latest milestone, I watched as they spoke of me as if I were still trying to figure life out, never once suspecting that I had already succeeded in a way they could never have imagined. The restaurant was always buzzing with praise, on review sites, in local food blogs, even in casual conversations around town. Yet, none of that recognition made its way back to my family. To them, I was still that quiet, unsure guy who hadn't figured it out, but they had no idea. The quiet, average son was actually the owner of the place everyone was whispering about. I had kept it under wraps, not wanting to seem boastful or, worse, rub my success in their faces. I didn't want to be the one to make them uncomfortable with the truth. The irony of it all was maddening. The Maple Bistro was doing so well that I was considering expanding to a second location. My family had no clue, and I wasn't sure how to break the news. But tonight, things were about to change. The conversation echoed through the crowded room, cutting through the noise of clinking glasses and laughter. "Honestly, I don't know what he's doing with his life," my aunt said loudly, her voice filled with an all-too-familiar tone of mockery. "Jordan never seems to get his act together. I mean, how long can you keep figuring things out before it gets embarrassing?" My heart sank. I had heard these kinds of comments before, but this time something inside me snapped. My parents, standing beside her, laughed along, nodding in agreement. "It's like he's still waiting for something to happen," my mom added with a chuckle. "Poor guy, always so lost." The sting of their words was sharp, but it was the last straw. I could feel my pulse quicken as a burning determination rose within me. I was done being the punchline of their jokes, done hiding my success behind a wall of silence. They had no idea who I really was, and maybe it was time they learned. I had worked too hard to stay in the shadows. Taking a deep breath, I calmly walked toward the center of the room where everyone had gathered. The room seemed to quiet as I approached, the chatter halting for a moment, the tension building in the air. My family turned to look at me, their faces filled with confusion and curiosity. Without hesitation, I grabbed the microphone from the host and addressed the room. "I'm Jordan," I said, my voice steady but carrying a weight of finality. "And I own the Maple Bistro." A shocked silence followed. No one knew how to respond. My mom, her face a mix of disbelief and confusion, chuckled nervously. "That's funny, Jordan. The restaurant? What are you talking about?" A few scattered laughs followed, but I stood there, unwavering, ready to face whatever came next. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The truth was out, whether they believed it or not. The room fell into an eerie silence. For a few long moments, no one moved or spoke. The weight of my words hung in the air, thick with disbelief. I could see the shock spreading across their faces, as if they couldn't quite grasp the reality of what I had just said. My mom was the first to recover, her voice trembling. "Jordan, honey, you're joking, right? This isn't some prank?" She laughed, weakly, but there was no humor in it. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for validation that my words were somehow untrue. "The Maple Bistro? How did we never hear about this?" I could see the confusion clouding her face, her mind scrambling to make sense of something that didn't fit into the narrative she'd held about me for so long. She had always seen me as the uncertain, aimless son, the one who needed her guidance, the one who hadn't figured it out yet. But now, her world was crumbling. She was forced to face the fact that her son had built something she could never have imagined. The truth was too much for her to absorb all at once. My dad, who had been silently watching the exchange, finally spoke, his voice tight. "This doesn't make sense, Jordan. You never said anything about this. Why would you keep something like this from us?" He was in denial, unable to reconcile the son he thought he knew with the man standing in front of him. Claire stood nearby, her face pale, unsure of what to say. She had always been the family's shining star, the one who was always praised for her success. But now it was as if I had pulled the rug out from under her. Her spotlight was suddenly stolen, and for the first time I saw the faintest crack in her perfect exterior. The realization that she wasn't the only one getting attention, the only one succeeding, seemed to hit her hard. The room buzzed with whispered questions, people asking me about the restaurant, how I had done it, when I had started, why I hadn't told them sooner. The tension in the air was palpable, each question a reminder of how invisible I had been for so long. But now there was no going back. I had taken my place in this family, and no one could ignore me anymore. As I stood there, the hum of conversations surrounding me, I felt something shift deep inside, something I hadn't felt in years: empowerment. For so long, I had lived in the shadows of my family's expectations, constantly trying to prove myself to people who never truly saw me. But now, in this moment, it was clear. I didn't need their validation anymore. My success was undeniable, and it had nothing to do with their approval. The Maple Bistro had already spoken for me, loud and clear. My parents, still grappling with the shock, began to fumble through awkward apologies. My mum's voice quivered as she mumbled, I didn't know, Jordan. I'm sorry we didn't see it." My dad, though his face was still a mask of confusion, nodded slowly. "We underestimated you," he said, his words heavy with regret. But their apologies didn't hit the same way anymore. I had worked for years to build something on my own, and it wasn't their approval I needed, it was my own. Claire, who had remained silent up until this point, shifted uneasily. I could see the wheels turning in her mind. She had always been the one in the spotlight, but now, for the first time, she was forced to confront her own insecurities. Maybe she had been more concerned about keeping her position in the family's eyes than ever acknowledging my success. As I took in the scene, I realized just how far I'd come. From the quiet, overlooked son to the proud owner of a thriving restaurant, it had all been part of a journey that no one could take away from me. I didn't need their approval anymore. I had built this, and that was enough. Whether my family would ever fully understand or accept who I had become was uncertain. Maybe they'd always see me as the quiet son who wasn't good enough. But I had nothing left to prove to them. Sometimes it's not about proving others wrong, it's about proving to yourself that you're capable of achieving greatness even when no one believes in you.